Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here this evening. My name is Hallie Grand, and I am going to be facilitating our webinar this evening. I do just want to go over a few quick reminders before we get started. Because this is a webinar, your cameras, microphone, and chat are all going to be disabled during the webinar. If you have questions at any point, please use the Q&A feature that's located at the bottom of your screen in Zoom. It looks like two little chat bubbles. Although we will be answering questions at the end of the presentation today, you can type your questions into that Q&A box at any point. We will not be taking comment over Zoom tonight. Public comment must be submitted to our email, which is going to be oyster.mariculture@tpwd.texas.gov. You will be seeing that email address later on in the presentation, as well as in a follow-up email from Zoom that you'll be getting tomorrow. That follow-up email will also have a link to our YouTube channel where you can view a recording of this webinar along with recordings of other webinars, and a link to our Oyster Mariculture website on the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department website. Again, we will not be taking public comment over Zoom, but you can ask questions at any point. And with that, I will hand it over to our presenter for the evening, Lindsay.
Hi, thanks, Holly. Hi, I'm Dr. Lindsay Hamble. I'm coordinator for the Cultivated Oyster Mariculture program at TPWD. Also on hand, we have Leslie Hartman and Karen Utley from the Matagorda Bay ecosystem team. And they're here if there's any specific local Matagorda Bay questions that come in. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. So tonight, we are here for a public hearing for the proposed N-0004 nursery hatchery facility located in Matagorda Bay. The purpose of this public hearing is to give you information on the proposed site that's located in Matagorda Bay, specifically the Tres Palacios subbay in the system, information on the facility, and then give you instructions on how to submit public comment. First, I'm going to go over a brief background of oyster mariculture here in Texas. TPWD permits the activity of cultivated oyster mariculture for grow-out sites, also called farms, and nursery hatchery locations. Also, just as to let you know that throughout the presentation, I might use the abbreviation COM, C-O-M, for cultivated oyster mariculture. All of the mariculture grow-out sites are off-bottom mariculture. Applicants nominate their own sites and conduct a natural resource survey. The permit that TPW issues is for 10 years. Only Eastern oyster from Texas broodstock are allowed in mariculture. An annual fee for the permit is paid based on the size of the particular location. Applicants, before a final permit is authorized and activity begins, applicants must get other authorizations from state and federal agencies, such as the Texas General Land Grant Office, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and the U.S. Coast Guard. For grow-out locations, there's an active use criteria of a minimum oysters stocked per year. In those grow-out locations, year-round harvest is allowed. However, they must comply with all Texas Department of State Health Service regulations. So this industry is governed by various various regulatory bodies. Molluscan shellfish have oversight from both state and federal, and they have oversight from the activity side and the human health component. A little bit more information on the Texas Department State Health Services and water classification. TPWD is not involved in the water classification. That is handled by Department of Health, and they sample water bodies throughout Texas for various contaminants and advise for various industries. For oysters or molluscan shellfish, those water samples help determine the water body classification. And this is based on federal parameters that are used across the nation. Those classifications are approved, conditionally approved, restricted, prohibited, and unclassified waters. Those classifications only impact oyster harvest, and so they do not have any impacts or bearing on other recreational activities unless someone is using their fishing license to recreational harvest oysters. For further information and details on those classifications, please visit the Department of State Health Services website. For this proposed site, it is a oyster nursery hatchery facility, again, located on Tres Palacios Bay at the Marine Education Center property that is currently owned by the Palacios Marine Agriculture Research. In public waters, only the water intake structure of this proposed site are in the public water column, and the rest is located on their private property. So this again is in Matagorda County, Matagorda Bay System in the city of Palacios, and this is highlighted in red here is a rough outline of the proposed site. This is a proposed site map identification submitted by the applicant. So this red polygon here and the coordinates of the different points are the area that is for permitting. So mainly, again, on privately owned property, a private pier, and then the water intake structure will be in the actual water column at the end of that pier. At the proposed site, the micro nursery, the spawning area, and the quarantine area are all located on private property. So for this public meeting, we will not be going into the details of the schematics of those areas. For the areas that are or concern public waterways, the water will be pumped out of the bay using centrifugal pumps with a primary filtration structure around the pump intake, and we'll have a diagram of that next. The maximum water draw from those pumps will be 0.49 cubic feet per second. They will have screens of a minimum of 8 square feet around that one point, so that distributes the velocity of water intake across those screening areas for a maximum velocity of 0.06 feet per second. The National Marine Fisheries recommendation for maximum velocity across the screen is 0.2. The seawater used will drain through an existing drainage canal system. This is an earthen drainage system that is existing in the site, and then it exits over a vegetated riparian zone before it hits the bay. The salt waters exiting from the buildings will not be chemically treated. If quarantine is needed and the seawater has to be chlorinated for that quarantine area, that water will be treated to denature that chlorine prior to exiting and disposal. There will be separate drains for any sanitary sewage system, separate drains to a sanitary sewage system for any domestic water structures used in the buildings. Here is a diagram of those pumps. So the piping will go along the top of the pier and will not be in the waters. What will come down into the water is flex hose that will go to the pumps, and then around the flex hose where the water is drawn up, there will be a caging system with the screen to distribute the velocity, intake velocity over a wider area, and those screens will have small slots and mesh over that to reduce impingement or any organisms sucked into the pumps. The drainage system, so the existing drainage are these looks like in these photos, aerial photos, small depressions, but it's indicated by these purple dashed lines from the building. Well, let me start where the water comes in. The water comes in from the intake, goes through piping on the top of the pier and across their property. There are existing ponds from when this facility was a technical college that was constructed during the 1980s, and existing ponds were dug at that time. So existing ponds can hold and store water. So if they need to stop pumping from the bay, these ponds will hold water. It will have secondary and tertiary filtration as needed before it goes into their hatchery spawning building. Water will exit from the buildings into pipes that then meet the existing earthen drainage system that was again dug in a joint project cooperation between the Army Corps of Engineers and the county officials and the technical college. This is a hardened earth drainage system. It does have some vegetation growing in it. It goes around the property and then over here to your vegetated riparian zone before finally exiting here. With this and the amount of water, maximum water pumped and would be exiting from these buildings, is likely that any water that goes through these canals, very little of that will reach and exit to the bay. More likely that through absorption and evaporation along these canals, any sort of water would be absorbed or evaporated before reaching to the bay. And here is where those existing drainage exits. Again, there is vegetation that would slow down any water exiting and could trap any sort of sediment and filter before exiting to the bay. So we would not anticipate at the proposed water pumping levels and drainage levels that this would cause any sort of scouring of this area. The broodstock for this facility, they currently only plan to have oysters or broodstock from the northern genetic region that they are located in. If in the future they plan to bring out of region Texas oysters into the system, they would submit amendment request that would then be reviewed and approved, and there would have to be appropriate treatment of discharge to prevent any sort of escapement of genetic material from oysters that were from outside of this region. For oysters coming in, all seed brought into the facility from out of state will be disease tested before being allowed to transport in, and oysters from other Texas bays and regions are subject to disease testing prior to being brought into this facility after review by TPWD officials and the water conditions of those other areas. They also do have a plan for quarantining those oysters and cleaning oysters that are brought into this facility prior to them being incorporated into their activities. So the next steps for this proposed site is TPWD is currently open and will be accepting public comments until October 11th. You may submit your public comments to oyster.mariculture@tpwd.texas.gov. After those are submitted, we will consider any public comment, and any appropriate actions based on those comments may be taken. Then a conditional permit is issued. This does not mean the mariculture activity can begin, but rather that they then take their conditional permit and information to those other state and federal agencies to receive those authorizations. Once the applicant secures all those other authorizations, then they submit documentation of receiving those to TPWD, and we A final permit is authorized and issued after the first year's annual fees are received. At that point, mariculture activity can begin. So at this point in time, we will be taking any questions. So we'll give you a few minutes here to type any questions that you have. And I will keep up this screen. I'll put up this screen here actually, I will leave it on this screen that has the deadline for public comment and our website, and we'll give any participants a few minutes to type in comments or questions and answer those as they come in. I'm going to stop my video for a moment as we wait for those. I don't see any more open questions here. If you are watching this recording later or as a recording instead of live, and you have any questions or comment, again, submit an email to oyster.mariculture@tpwd.texas.gov, and we can answer any questions, or that is the place that we will collect your public comment. Pardon me. I will now stop sharing my screen and hand this back over to Holly for any final reminders for participants. Holly?
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. So again, just another reminder that you will be receiving that follow-up email from Zoom at some point tomorrow with a link, well, lots of links, a link to our Oyster Mariculture website on the Parks and Wildlife page, as well as a link to our YouTube channel where you can find a recording of this webinar. Give us about 24 hours at least to get the recording up. And the email address, again, our Oyster Mariculture email address will be included in that email as well. So thank you again so much, everyone, for being here this evening. I appreciate it, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you, everyone.